As you all know, Erin Brockovich is here with us today, and she is on her 6th, I think, visit to Australia. Many of you will be aware of who Erin is and how she came to fame. I'm sure you will have all seen the film starring Julia Roberts, in which Erin defeats a corporate giant, PG&E, who have contaminated the water supply in Hinckley, California. I'm sure you'll all appreciate that $333 million worth of compensation was awarded to the 600-odd residents from Hinckley, and since that point, that's what Erin's dedicated her life to. She's been out there talking to people, understanding their situations in environmental cases such as the Hinckley case and many, many others. And she has a website dedicated to the inquiries, which I think has become a pretty central point for people who just don't know where to go, and they need answers, and they need to have a sense of purpose and understanding and a sense of justice. Please join me in welcoming Erin Brockovich.
My passion and my love is being an advocate for consumers who have been injured in many regards, who more often than not, their voices just simply are not heard. I have a bipolar child who we have to monitor behaviors and what happens. I've just gone through the experience of dealing with having lost my parents very recently, my father on January 5th, and seeing behavior changes as we age, and seeing dementia and Alzheimer's, and the changes that happen to somebody when they've been injured and when they're changing, and when we don't understand it, and when we can push them aside. And that's the worst thing that we could be doing. And I am about getting people to be able to speak up, and when they can't, I feel that it is our job, for those of us who are still so fortunate and blessed, because that's really the only thing that I think we have to offer in this life, is to jump in and help them have a better life. Again, I understand all of this. I had a terrible, actually, I wouldn't have known it at the time. I don't think my parents would have known it at the time. Accident, which probably resulted in some brain injury for myself. When I was a little girl growing up in Lawrence, Kansas, out in a park, they have a real locomotive train, and all the kids would go there and play. And one day I was running across the top, and my dad called out for me and said, "You need to come home." And so I started to come down the ladder, these steel ladders, and I got scared, and I looked back and I said, "I can't come down." And he said, "You know, step right here into my hand, I'll catch you." And I missed his hand, and I fell, and I hit the rungs of the train right here as I came down, and I landed flat on the track right here. My brother thought I was dead. I think my dad was very concerned that something had gone terribly wrong. I was in and out of consciousness for days, and I had a set of black eyes that lasted for about a year. And my mother was the first one that began to notice very subtle changes in how I was behaving, tying my shoes. Suddenly the right foot was going on the left foot. And long story short, over time, I seemed to be suffering from a learning disability. I seemed to be suffering from what's now known as dyslexia. We didn't have the technology. We certainly didn't have a group such as this that existed that could look at those changes and try to find out what was happening that could still help me learn. And sometimes I think children have injuries and they fall through the cracks and we don't see what's happening to them. And we need to get in there and be able to more compassionately and with understanding be able to help them. And my biggest message to all of you, and to those of you who are here today that have been injured, and something that I learned, because I was different, it didn't mean that I was inferior. And I fought very, very hard to get beyond that, because a lot of times people will label us and put us in a box. But that you do have that opportunity through organizations to help you, and love of your family, to just keep fighting to be heard, keep fighting to make yourself better, and give yourself the time and the opportunity to do that. It can be a very long haul, and don't ever give up on yourself, and don't ever let somebody else label you or put you in a place where because you've had an injury, because maybe you don't say things that they expect you to say, to think that you're different, to think that you're inferior. You're absolutely not. And I have found every single time people that have had injuries, people who are different, people who have suffered, are actually the greatest gifts on this planet. And they see things in a different way. And they can help us as much as we can help them. I try to constantly be out there and be their voice, and I have nothing to lose and everything to gain by standing up and saying, this is wrong. It isn't corporations versus people. It isn't a Republican Party and a Democrat Party and all the politics and everything else that we do to make life so complicated. It's right or it's wrong. And a lot of times companies are missing morality. A lot of times what they need to do is get out of their ivory towers and come on down into these communities and begin to get humbled and back to what's important. And there are very fundamental core values that they lose sight of very quickly. And that is the right to health, families, clean water, and good air. So they can be very obnoxious. We can be buried in the legal system in the United States. This is something that I share with groups that I like to call my body politics, because people oftentimes believe government is an arm that's there to help them. And in many instances, I think that they want to, but they do get lost along the way. And in the United States, many agencies that I deal with have very well-intentioned people in them, such as yourself, but their hands become tied. They're understaffed, they're overburdened, and they have no money to outreach to go and find out what's happening, or to even question what it is that big companies is giving them. It becomes a very one-sided event. So we fight them all the time. You know, I've just started a map in the United States where, again, I've become this repository of information, and I kept seeing the word cancer come up over and over and over again. And so a lot of times if I see the same thing over and over again, it's an indicator or flag that something is going on somewhere. So I started looking back at these emails of communities coming to me that we, you know, have 8 children with glioblastoma on the same block. We find it odd. We have 12 kids with leukemia on the same street, and we find it odd. And it is odd. So I started to plot them on a map so I could kind of look at what was happening. And there's over 500 sites on there already. And so see 500 dots on the United States map is telling me that we, whoever we are, myself, our judicial system, our governmental agencies, even industry, we're not listening to what's happening to those that have been harmed and in this community. And we've got to start doing that, or we will not change. And that's one thing that I truly love about Australia. You're very young. You have an opportunity still to get it right. You have an opportunity still to be a model to the world of getting back to learning from the people, talking to the people, working with the people. This is something that Simon and I have discussed on so many occasions, to be able to have the injured or the community with the legal arm, if you need it, because sometimes they're good protection. As much as I like to tease them, they can be good protection. But to sit at a table with government itself and with that company itself and work through it so it becomes a win-win for everybody. It doesn't have to go one way or another. Settling a big case for $333 million, I have learned today, I knew back then, doesn't change a thing. It doesn't solve anything. It can help somebody who's been injured to get through things like therapy and medical care and chemotherapy, because oftentimes they can't get insurance. But it can't be the solution. 20 years forward from 1991, I'm back in Hinckley, California again. The same woman that contacted us back in 1991 that had hexavalent chromium in her well And I went out and met her. Her horse had just died, reports of animals covered with tumors. PG&E was buying homes and handing out bottled water. She calls me a few months ago. She moved way out of the plume, where government and science told her it was safe to live, has hexavalent chromium in her well. PG&E never cleaned up the plume. It broke through, and for 10 years has been hidden from all of us again. Now we have hundreds more people who are injured, hundreds of more homes who've lost their property. And I think to myself, something's really wrong. And we've got to get more awareness, more education. We've got to be able to help get our agencies to have better oversight and funding so they can better watch communities, which is where all of you can actually come in and start to make the difference. Awareness is key, and prevention's got to be our goal of the future, because every single one of us, in many regards, could be at jeopardy at any one moment. And we don't always appreciate things that happen until it's in our backyard, until it happens to us, until we are injured, until we are harmed, until we are deceived. And then suddenly we do become marginalized. Suddenly we are set out on the sidelines. And that's the worst possible thing that I think any of us can do as human beings. The root cause of so many of our problems in this world is deception. And we get deceived, and that's where the strength of we comes from, to go out and help educate people. And we've started a little map here in Australia, and we got 8 red dots on the map already. And I think about that because your population is much smaller than ours. You do live in a country where I think it's getting ready to explode. And so the uniqueness here is, as you explode, if communities out the gate and organizations out the gate can rise to the issues that are happening and begin to work with your agencies, with companies, with your judicial arm to collectively make it a win-win. I look at what happened in Hinckley all the time. They paid out $333 million in their first settlement, and most people don't know that in 1995 I uncovered another case against PG&E. Same chemical, hexavalent chromium, same injuries, just in a different town. That case settled in 2006 for $335 million. They've spent in excess of $50 million, and I'm probably lowballing it, in defense costs, $50 million in ongoing cleanup costs. And now a third round's coming. And they've spent more than $1 billion. Agencies in the state have been slapped in the face repeatedly by them. And I think, why? Had a company just operated with morality before money, they would have actually saved lives. They would have helped the state clean up this problem. They would have saved their company a whole lot of money. So I think that there is a much better way for us to do business and to interact. We have to be able to coexist together. Every community I'm in, they don't want companies to go away. That's not what they're asking. Every one of us here today is thankful. It's warm, you have air conditioning, and your lights are on, and we all drove here. We appreciate what they provide for us. They were originally designed to make our lives better. So there's really got to be a way that we can balance that system and coexist together and do right by one another.